When we speak to our panel, who are mostly over 40, certainly in the high net worth tier because they've had time to build their wealth, they often feel neglected or invisible in marketing activities. And when they do feature, they're often not exactly seen as vital, energetic, aspirational people. Like, these are highly successful, highly stylish. Sometimes they tell us the adverts don't really speak to that. And everyone's so obsessed with getting the next generation, which is not the wrong thing, but also don't take the eye off the current customer because they're driving the vast majority of sales, certainly in the true luxury tiers.
I'm so glad somebody said it. But there is this trap, isn't there, for the younger marketers to just go after the new or future generation. One of the promises of Luxe Consumer IQ is to bring you closer to the consumer. In today's case, closer to one of the hardest groups to reach, the high net wealth individual. My guests today are Wisson and Meryam Schneider from Altiant, a specialist research agency with an invitation-only panel for high net wealth consumers, validated manually across key global markets. Chris leads Altiant's international proprietary research into luxury categories and high net wealth individuals, and Meryam leads their thought leadership and partnerships looking into the changing luxury consumer. And I wanted to bring Chris and Meryam onto the show because these consumers are notoriously difficult to reach through traditional research. They don't sit on research panels and they're not easy to access. And that makes access to people like Chris and Meryam way more valuable. So today we're talking about what this audience actually cares about and how they're evolving and what luxury marketers need to understand now. Chris and Meryam, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chris, let's start with understanding the luxury consumer, or the affluent consumer, we can say. Luxury brands talk constantly about being consumer-centric, but affluent consumers are, as I've just said, one of the hardest audiences to access. For marketers listening, what's the smartest way to start building stronger understanding of the high net wealth consumer?
The best way is really just to speak to them directly. A lot of our panelists want to share their opinion. So they request more surveys from us. They really want to engage with the brands that they love. So brands can often assume they know their customers, and I'm sure they do know them very well. But the best way is to spend time with them in the shop, have a very direct and open line of communication with them. The more they do that, the better understanding they have. And that's really where we come into the picture. We speak to wealthy consumers every month. They're answering surveys on wealth management, fashion, automotive, everything to do with luxury. So they really want to give their opinion and shape the future of luxury. They're very invested in the brands and luxury as a whole. So for the brands themselves, they just have to get close and speak and keep on top of these changing trends.
Are there any patterns or behaviours that are surprising you? Once you start looking at the data more closely, is there something that jumps out at you?
We see evolution of trends so much. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of sort of conservatism and concern with the way things are going in the world. I mean, I don't want this to be a negative indicator, but, they're very in touch with how the world around them affects their finances. We're seeing things about saving more versus spending, but at the same time, they're taking this longer term view. So they're thinking about their health, their wellness. I'm sure we'll talk about wellness quite a lot in this session, but wellness is such an important factor for them nowadays. They're thinking about how their money can help them live well for longer.
Longevity, it seems to be a really big topic at the moment.
Yes, I'd add something as well, is that we often have that impression that trends, behaviors are changing fast in this specific niche population, which is rarely the case. Appreciation, perceptions can change, but by the time behavior really changes, that it could be a long time. Their investments are more important than the rest of the population. So I think that's an interesting point to mention here, because it's often counterintuitive when we hear the news and we have this impression that everything is moving super fast. With this category of population, it's a little bit more thought through. There is impulsion, but it is also thought through, particularly changes of behaviors with consumption or loyalty toward brands, or even longevity, or everything that's related to wellness, so automotive and other sectors.
Yeah, we have the say-do gap. We talk about it a lot. So whenever we ask about sustainability, people say it's very important to me. I'm prepared to pay more for brands that are active and committed to this. And yet the shift from actually saying they want to do that and actually converting that interest to an actual purchase or a change in behavior takes longer. So it's happening, but it's probably slower than a lot of people realize. It's not an overnight thing. It's more of a gradual evolution.
This group of consumers often get grouped as one homogeneous audience, whereas they're quite specific, aren't they? And I can see you nodding. From everything you see across the data, how should marketers really look at this group of consumers, of the high net wealth individual consumer today?
They are indeed very much unique. Each country has a very different mentality. For example, whenever we do multi-country projects, we'll often see the US and the UK respondents having quite a similar response to questions, similar behaviors and actions. Chinese respondents often very different and very much an outlier in our research. They're very positive. They're very hesitant to be critical or negative about something. So you can ask them a question and they'll say they'll love it, even if maybe they don't. So there's a lot of psychology, mentality things that we try to uncover. Obviously, we look by age, by gender, by wealth levels. Absolutely, wealth levels is important. So you'll often see people talking about high net worth individuals, which we do study, but not exclusively. So we look at the top 10%. So to qualify for our panel, they have to be in the top 10%. But within that, there is a lot of variance in wealth levels, and it does have a significant impact on the way they think, the way they act, and the brands that they engage with.
The commonality is the wealth, household income, investable assets, and everything else can diverge. So really researching the similarities and researching the differences. This is really our challenge with quantitative research, and that's why quantitative research is so important in luxury wealth management industries, I'd say.
You can't often guess what the results will be. So when I design a survey, I like to think what the results would be, because to a certain extent, people are predictable, but actually the results are often wildly different to how we expect, sometimes much higher, sometimes much lower. And that's really where the gold is, because it's very easy for a brand to assume they know what a trend is or what an opportunity is, but how big is that opportunity exactly? Is it bigger than we expect? Is it smaller? What's this threat? Bigger or smaller than expected? So that's really where we try to uncover the gems and the nuggets, we call them, in the data, because assumption can only get you so far with data.
And let's stay on that point in terms of assumptions. What are the patterns? You work across different regions, and you mentioned a little bit there about the cultural differences. What sort of have you seen in the data that's fundamentally different, say, across a particular region that surprised you, as you say, and perhaps people assume the opposite?
China is always the market that comes out with very interesting and unique data points. So, for example, whenever we ask a survey that touches on sustainability, the Chinese response is always considerably higher. I think, for example, EV uptake is the highest in China. We sometimes make a leap of understanding why that's the case. For example, unfortunately, a lot of Chinese cities have problems with pollution. So day to day, they're seeing the impacts of, environmental issues. And perhaps that's nudging them to adopt this mentality of being much more aware of the negatives of environmental problems, and it actually forces their hand and makes them adopt a behavior that's much more considerate in terms of environmental credentials.
And what about the US?
The US is very interesting because obviously the wealth levels in the US have really exploded in recent years. Like, it's not so long ago that the US and the UK were quite similar for salaries and things like that. And now we have an American high net worth individual that has a lot of disposable income. So the number of millionaires in our panel has grown significantly in recent years. They've got a lot more money to spend, and travel is really such a big area where they're looking to spend that money. So a lot of hotels, for example, in Europe, they're reporting that so much of their customer is coming from America. They've got a huge amount of disposable income. They're looking to spend it not exclusively on experiences. So I'm sure that everyone's aware of this experiences versus products thing, which we do see, but it's really about spending their money on unique things that it's more about the feeling. How does how I'm spending my money make me feel? And often the most obvious way of sort of feeling that is from travel. So people can have a very memorable holiday that lives with them for a long time. And we see that a lot, that actually they're looking to spend their money, more of their money on travel, food and drink, much more experiential things rather than products, but not exclusively so.
So I guess one of the advantages of tracking affluent consumers consistently, because you've been running your panels for quite some time, is that you start to see those shifts long before, I guess, they become behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, and you've touched on some of them already there, what shifts are you seeing most clearly in how affluent consumers think, behave and spend?
So the idea of personal service is really more important than ever nowadays. These high net worth individuals don't want to be seen as just a number on a spreadsheet or another customer. They want to be seen as unique individuals. So brands do need to be aware of this need to treat everyone and really cater to their individual needs. And I'm sure we'll talk more about AI later, but that is a way that AI can actually enhance the service that they're offering and really make people seen. So in a hotel, for example, it can take away a lot of the administration elements that go on behind the scenes. And I think this is an important thing, that it's not something that's in your face, very obvious. It's behind the scenes. It's a support mechanism that really helps brands to get to know their customers and serve them better than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we often talk about that because there are several sets of data that we see, and in particular the increasing use of AI amongst high net worth individuals and affluent. And I think the last research we conducted was showing, it was amongst US, UK and China, the use across different needs. Research was coming really high, so researching, but also second opinion in medical advice. We had very small proportion of therapy with AI, and some really strong differences like AI image generation, which in China was super high, close to 68-70%, versus UK, US, where they were only using it for image generation to the tune of 30%. So what we often talk about that is that it's not because they use it that they want it, and particularly in those protective areas of luxury. It's, I don't want to be impressed by how well you are mastering AI tools. I actually want to see the results of it and make me feel good by using tech and AI in the background. And then I'll probably quote the Chief Information Technology of LVMH, who talked about quiet AI, and I loved it. Quiet tech and quiet AI. So I think that's really this sort of distinction that's very, very important, because there's a lot of conversations around AI and luxuries. Use AI for a seamless and exceptional experience, but you don't need to impress me in your use of technology, in a way.
Realistically, 3 years ago, AI was quite basic, and we've kind of assimilated how effectively and seamlessly it's sort of integrated into our lives. But that's a huge change in such a short space of time. And yes, it can help to make an experience more seamless, but it has to be, as you say, in service of the end product. It can't, it can't take over and be the star of the show. It has to be the supporting actor, because that's what luxury is about, personal. If you're outsourcing marketing campaigns, and there's been a few examples where brands have really leaned too heavily on it, and there's a very sort of strong opposition to it. It's like, why are luxury brands using AI? Because it's such a personal industry. It is about the personal touch. It's about quality. It's about taking time. It's when you have a luxury Swiss watch, they'll make a point of how many hours are spent hand making that. When a brand puts out a post that's clearly AI written and things, it just doesn't hit the same way. It feels a bit casual, and luxury is not casual.
I completely agree. I think there's a predicament that the luxury industry is in. On one hand, luxury is always at the forefront. It's always the pioneer. It's always leading, which you suggest is the AI evolution or era now. And on the other hand, luxury is hugely human-led. And I feel like some of the backlash, I've been monitoring it as well. I completely agree with you. There's been a lot of backlash on luxury brands that have used it, particularly in creative processes. The creative process especially, which is what I think you were articulating there, is very human-led. And when you give that to AI, then what is the point? And I think it's quite polarizing for the luxury industry.
Yes, consumer research and insights are extremely important for luxury brands, wealth management organizations. However, there is a balance between understanding the consumer and also the creativity. And I think that's where creativity and what the luxury brands have to bring to the world. And I think that's where, if AI sits too heavily, that could be problematic or remove a little bit of the magic of it. And I totally agree about creative, and we hear a lot about some advertising campaigns, and this is the more shocking, probably, use of it.
Creativity is so important, and it always comes out as one of the top factors when someone says what makes me click through on an advert online. Relevance, creativity. Those are the two people really want to see. And it goes back again to this idea of, if a brand's going to advertise to me, I want to feel like it's advertised to me, not to all rich people or all people like me. It's like, this communication is for me specifically. AI can help do that, but if it feels like it's just an amalgamation of ideas that have been smashed together, is that really creative? It's new, but is it creative? And I think people are getting a lot better at sort of identifying things like that and having quite a visceral reaction when they see it, and we have the term AI slop, obviously, but this idea of slop and fatigue when people are just having a very immediate reaction to something like that.
And it's a sea of sameness. This is the problem. The more people that are using AI, the more conclusions are the same, and therefore the same actions are being taken by different brands. And distinctiveness is one of the things that's very special in luxury, and brand codes, and having, been in the luxury on the client side, it's what we used to obsess over, our brand codes in our brand health tracker, looking at it every single year. What is the measure on distinctiveness? And yeah, the slop is a real problem for luxury. And I think, to your point, Meryam, very much so, AI is being used on creative, but it should also be used on getting closer to consumers. Where is the bigger risk? Creative, because it's contrasting with what makes luxury, whereas getting closer to your consumers, now, hey, that's a real opportunity to kind of get under the skin of who they are as individuals, as you say, rather than trying to sort of group them all together. For sure.
A recent brand example we really have talked about a lot is Ferrari's new EV, the Luce. So everyone's had an opinion on it. A lot of people seem to think Ferrari rushed it out without thinking very carefully what their codes are. Where is this product going to take us in 10 years' time? And I saw lots of people redesigning the car with AI. And it was just like, they've obviously thought very carefully about, this is extremely specific and it's creative. It's different. It really cut through the noise. And that was a really interesting example of a brand that took a risk, quite a big risk. It's not for everyone, and that's fine. Not every product or not every brand needs to be for everyone.
On a positive note regarding being targeted, we have a millionaire media consumption, and it's deep research that we run every 2 years. And we can see here that being targeted by advertising that are relevant is very well received by millionaires. That study only covers millionaires and multimillionaires. It's very well received. And also the conversion of purchasing a product after having clicked through the ad. So this is very positive for brands. However, we also see that a portion of them is willing to use ad blockers on their machines. So I think there's really something here to be said about know me and serve me, or use the technology to serve me what is actually of interest.
But also, in that same survey, almost half of people said they were trying to reduce the screen time on their mobile. So really, for brands, they're going to have less of a window to reach these people. So it needs to be relevant, punchy, cut through the noise. And if you're just creating something that looks similar to everyone else, it's a sea of sameness. And how do you cut through in that environment? There's a brand we work with, and their catchphrase was less URL, more IRL, which was really great. So less time online, more time in real life. You know, do what you need to do online and then live your life, you know. And for brands, that's a challenge because it means less eyes on online adverts. But actually, it's an opportunity because then it gives them the chance to create experiential things in real life, pop-ups, you know, the evolution of the store from a place where you solely sell products. A lot of stores now don't sell any product. It's about immersion in that brand and really getting that customer to have the experience of the brand rather than just buying a new watch or a handbag.
I feel like it's coming back to get to know your consumer, because if you're overly relying on one channel, which is, as you say, the digital space and the ad blockers and all of those sort of barriers that come into place to access your consumer, if you really understand your consumer, they have a full life and there's lots of other channels that they're going to, experiencing and being present in. And if you know them and if you can understand them, then it's much easier to deliver what they want. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to the marketers that are listening to us. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a brand marketer and looking at your data globally, which signals do you think that luxury marketers probably should take most seriously now? And where is there a risk of maybe misreading this luxury consumer or this affluent high net wealth consumer?
As we touched upon at the beginning, this idea of actions taking longer to actually convert is very important. Like for brands to make a change, like the Ferrari example, you know, we'll only really know if that was successful in 10 years, perhaps, where the brands may be operating like, to continue with this example, EVs are the future. You know, we have to accept this. And our Ferrari getting a head start on competition. Okay, other brands have been in that space, but really it's about taking this long-term view because consumer trends are very long to actually come to fruition sometimes. So the intention can take a decade to actually become activated.
I actually feel a little bit for marketeers starting today. I'm trying to remember about 20 odd years ago, starting in marketing. They're being hit by a flow of data and information, from social media to influencer to their daily KPIs. I mean, you know that from having been with the Maison, and that's a lot. And I think that probably one advice would be to be measured and to be able to make a distinction between what is a signal and what is a real change. I think probably. So back to data, trackers obviously are very important for us. Longitudinal data, like to be able to really measure changes over time. It's not for everyone. This is expensive consumer research, but I think there's a lot out there also available, the voice of the consumer, a lot of thought leadership information from companies like ours as well. But it's really that. It's about making sure that it's this sort of, you know, the Queen, no panic, keep going, don't panic and keep going. It's about just being measured, I think, and really making that distinction with proper data.
A lot of the talk we see is that brands are rightly very interested in the next generation of luxury customers. So we'll often see, you know, Gen Z are going to account for X amount of luxury purchases by a certain date. And I think there's a lot of pressure on marketers to really tap into that demographic now. When we speak to our panel, who are mostly over 40, certainly in the high net worth tier because they've had time to build their wealth, they often feel neglected or invisible in marketing activities. And when they do feature, they're often not exactly seen as vital, energetic, aspirational people. And that's how they see themselves. Like, these are highly successful, highly stylish, but sometimes they tell us the adverts don't really speak to that. and everyone's so obsessed with getting the next generation, which is not the wrong thing, but also don't take the eye off the current customer, because they're driving the vast majority of sales, certainly in the sort of true luxury tiers. They're the ones who have got the disposable income to actually buy a Rolex or a Bentley or whatever it is. Whereas the other ones, the Gen Z, have an oversized impact on trends. So they're the trendsetters, but not necessarily the buyers. Not yet.
I'm so glad somebody said it, because being an insights person inside the Maison, often brand planning would come around and everybody's going to pick their segment, and everybody was going for the same segment, the young segment. Mm-hmm. And often what I'd say in-house was, do not alienate your core, because your core is, let's say, over 35 or over 40 or whatever it is, as you say, because there's a built up wealth and there is a bigger disposable income and there's been more brand loyalty and all sorts of things. But there is this trap, isn't there, for the younger marketers to just go after the new or future generation. And sometimes I'd actually lived it out. I had seen the result where it was declining, and because, sales would decline, and eventually you sort of can trace it back to, there hasn't been a dual campaign approach, or there's been an overemphasis on the upcoming audience who probably doesn't have the same disposable income.
The logic is obvious and sensible. It's like, we want to get that customer early, get them loving our brand so that in 10 years' time they'll still love us. But habits change. Like, it's very hard to get that strength of loyalty for a lifetime. Obviously, you've got Patek Philippe, who has the campaign about, you never own one, you pass it on to your generation. But generational loyalty, or decade-long loyalty, is quite hard. Like, over 10 years, there's brands that I used to love and I don't buy now. And I'm sure you're the same. It's pretty difficult for marketers to retain that passion.
Okay, so let's flip the script. So we're talking about the biggest trends. What about the smallest trends that you're seeing come up in the data that might feel minor now, but could turn into something, and you can say, you heard it here first?
I think one of the recent evolutions we've seen is, we mentioned it earlier, this idea of luxury as a feeling rather than a product or an experience. It's really, how does this make me feel? So, for example, Black Tomato, who is a luxury travel agency, concierge company, they launched, I think it was called the Feelings Engine last year, which was really nice. So it was not about where you're going or the type of holiday you want to book. How do I want to feel on my next holiday? Is it freedom? Is it adventure? Is it relaxation? And then the holidays are retrofitted to that. And I still don't see much of that, but I think that's so important now. When customers see brands, they want to feel something different and unique and special. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming years, where brands are really trying to get under the skin of how does a customer feel when they wear our watch? How do they feel when they're driving our car? What do we want to make them feel? And feelings, I think, is something that maybe is a pushback against this sort of atomized online nature of the world that we're living in. Is like the pendulum swings back the other way. How do we get back to more human? And how does this brand make me feel?
So there is this, and I'm hearing it from multiple sources, there is this sense that luxury is no longer a traditional siloed categories. There is this convergence, particularly around this topic of longevity and wellness and travel and experience and hospitality. And we saw in the most recent Bain report that they are the categories that are growing, as you mentioned, experience over product. What shifts are you seeing in how affluent consumers now think about luxury experiences across categories?
It's something that was very present with us. I think we've outgrown the statements such as accumulation in material goods is over, it's all about experience. I think we're really reaching a new frontier or a new level where experience is almost moving into outcome. So, Chris, you were mentioning that is how do I want to feel? And I really don't want to think in category. I want to travel well. I want to drive well. I want to learn well. I want to look well. Is this idea of really this attribute is cutting across all the industries. And it's really funny because in 2018, our CEO was really obsessed with overarching, statement of or desire to look at attributes. So confidence or trust, rather, well-being. So there were a couple of attributes that we were measuring across industry. So how do I feel when I go to my 5-star hotel? How do I feel when I purchase a handbag or when I go to the bank? And it was really interesting how some industry had already nailed it, for sure, back then. And one of them was hospitality. And it was 8 years ago now. How do I want to feel when I enter my bank branch, my private bank office? I want to feel the same way I feel when I enter my favorite high-end hotel. And we were laughing about like the signature scents, because hotels were really big in, Raffles is all about bergamot, and there's bergamot in the lobby, and there's bergamot smell, and the soap is bergamot. And I literally learned this morning that there are a particular private bank using signature scents in their offices. And I think it's wonderful. That's really understanding that there is something that travels with the customer. We talk about consumer-centric for a brand, but actually the customer-centric is for an entire industry and various industries, because they're targeting the same consumer. Mm-hmm. If I'm all about sustainability, and I'm very careful about the hotel I choose, and I don't want them to pollute the nearby river or to be kind to the local populations, then this will travel with me. I'm not going to get a car that is highly polluting. So there's really something to be said about this experience across all categories.
Would it be fair to say that brands now need to stop thinking about individual categories and start thinking in ecosystems and more lifestyle?
Totally. I think the successful brands are the brands that are really going to embrace that, either by doing it themselves. I mean, we see a lot of collaborations. Chris just conducted a survey around collaborations in luxury. So, because we want to keep the authenticity, I don't think that brands should be where their DNA is not inviting to be. There's evolution, but could be corruption as well. So either through collaborations or developing and expanding. I mean, we've seen hoteliers and luxury brands. We've seen luxury brand suites, cruises, but we also see it in technology is probably more relevant, where they would partner, and the ecosystem will also include medical and tech. And so I truly think that the successful brands are going to be the one thinking about the consumer as building the ecosystem to service the customer, to be of service, that feeling, that touch that they will articulate for the consumer.
For example, why can't a wealth management brand company be inspired by a car brand? Why silo your inspiration and only look at your competitors? And I'm sure most do look widely across the different industries, but that is how the luxury individual shops and behaves. You said it. They'll carry their attitudes and behaviors cross-category. They carry their aesthetic. Their priorities are, they're shopping 7, 8, 9 categories. So they're always going to have the same things front of mind, whether it's travel, automotive. And that was the idea of the luxury convergence collaborations report we've done, where, we're seeing categories bleed into each other. So we've got fashion brands partnering with Formula One race teams, and actually branding overtly Gucci Alpine, for example. So that's a very interesting new collaboration. And we're seeing it more and more. And the research we did showed that actually the customer likes to see this. Execution is so important, of course. Like, it has to make sense, and there has to be synergies between the brands. There has to be logic, authenticity, and all of the usual things that you would expect from a convergence or a collaboration, but it makes the brand seem more modern, innovative, interesting, creative, fun. And actually luxury should be fun. You know, why does everything have to be serious? You know, and it's something we see quite a lot. Automotive does a very good job of talking about how fun their cars are to drive. But some markets, you know, fashion, jewelry, watches, you know, they do want to see some of these sort of lighter elements in the products and the advertising, and that will carry across categories.
What else did you find in the report that's really interesting that you can give us a sneak peek?
Actually, how many people have purchased a collaboration within the past year? So we thought maybe it would be 25% or something like that. It was actually 47. So, and that's a median investable assets of 1.6 million. So they were 51% of that sample were high net worths across US, UK and France. So actually, these are a great way to reach not only the sort of 10% to 1%, but actually the top 1%. And it's a very effective way for brands to reach new customers. So we all saw the Audemars Piguet Swatch collaboration recently. That certainly exposed Audemars Piguet to customers that have probably never purchased one of their products before. So that's a great way of really flexing the customer base and actually attracting new people, or maybe nudging your perceptions slightly into new spaces, because actually the customer, the high net worth customer, does want to see brands sort of experimenting in that area, if it makes sense.
Which is why the collaboration has to make sense, doesn't it? Because you don't want to be attracting the wrong consumer base.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about staying close to the consumer and how luxury marketers can get close to the high net wealth consumer moving forward in this increasingly digital and global age. From your vantage point, what is the easiest way, or what's the one piece of advice you have for luxury marketers to stay closer to today's high net wealth consumer?
I think it's a combination of what we've said before, right? It's about really keeping in mind that trends take a long time to establish themselves, that there is a lot of information, a lot of buzz. So really for us, it's data.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the macro, so really understanding the big changes, and in our case, the voice of the consumer. So ideally, we have trackers on our website that are available for everyone to use. So I think that's probably very important, to stay close to their consumer. I would also say qualified base. There's a lot of interest in having social media listening, but it's also very important to understand not just the numbers, but who's behind the numbers. I always have this bias of looking at a graph and going in the bottom right to see what's the source.
Mm-hmm.
So the number is great, but who's behind that number?
That's me in every presentation. What's the source? I don't believe you until I know the source.
We're totally insight freaks. But
Yes.
I think it's very important because it really says a lot.
Synthetic panels is a big discussion in market research at the moment. We strongly believe that certainly at that high net worth tier, it has to be human. So we manually validate everyone that joins our panel. We don't believe in using AI to actually do interviews. So we will never do that. So we are absolutely about getting the voice of the affluent consumer. And so we don't do qualitative. So everything we do is online, but we know that these people are who they say they are. And that's something we think is essential. You know, if you're a luxury brand, there's not enough data around to actually plug in to create a reliable output. So you have to go to the direct source, which is the people themselves.
100%. And I can tell you, having been in the luxury space, again, in-house, the amount of panels that told me they were affluent consumers. And I personally attended focus groups and I shut them down because I said, these are not the consumers you told me that we validated. So I'm a huge believer of making sure that the panel is the right panel and to be And to be close to your consumer, don't trust everything your agencies are saying, because I'm sure you guys are quite comfortable to be really transparent about who they are and how you select them. What about the people who perhaps don't have big budgets? What's your answer? I know you've got some free data online as well, but does it have to be an overly expensive exercise? Or
we work a lot with academia, university students. So we publish reports, and we also do that for our panel to continue being reactive and really entertained. So reports, we have this huge tracker, which is like visualization based and data filters. And obviously, always advise to also the macro, the Deloitte's Forces of Luxury. There's a lot out there, the UBS Wealth Report that is published regularly. I think there's a lot of interesting data that can be combined with the voice of the consumer. So definitely for marketeers, that's out there.
It's a patchwork, isn't it? It's never one data source. And if you are just using one data source, then I'd probably question your strategy.
Yeah, and curiosity. I mean, retail store, going there, just understanding how people are interacting. I think curiosity is probably a big plus.
It comes up a lot actually on this podcast about curiosity. Okay, so we've come to the end, and I can talk to you two for hours, but I can't. Is there anything on the topic that we haven't mentioned that either of you would like to mention before we finish?
My previous life was in wealth management. Is something that we see is often disconnected from luxury purchase sentiments, behaviors, is the wealth element. And in our tracker, there's a particular metric that we measure every quarter, is the consumer confidence in financial markets. And we see this evolving, obviously, geopolitical events, pandemic situations or wars and so on. So this, I think, is very important to understand, because we have a glamorous tendency to disconnect luxury from the source of the wealth. And our wealth management clients obviously are interested in this data, but I feel that it's not mentioned enough. We track the consumer confidence, which last quarter was, I think, around 78% of affluent and high net worth individual showing concern over negative confidence, if we may say, over the financial markets. And this is also connected to another data that we track, which is how they manage their investment portfolio. And here there's also a high number who changed their investment, so because of the economic situation. So I think this is important because it gives us a very important information about how they feel about the future, which often only shows later on in purchase.
Yes.
So that's probably the correlation between the money and the action, or the concern over money.
We never say correlation equals causation. Like sometimes things can happen because that's just the way it is. But often we do see in the tracker where you can trace it back in hindsight that actually that was the genesis of that trend and that behavior actually playing out in real time. So that concern about financial markets, geopolitical instability, already people are telling us they plan to save more versus spending. There's already an element of people, I'm going to travel domestically more than internationally. So how quickly these things actually manifest in behavior, we've touched upon previously in the say-do gap. But things like travel, that could be immediate. So you could see a lot more domestic travel in the coming years as the world becomes quite unstable. The one point I wanted to sort of finish on was this idea of value for money, which we haven't actually talked about. The perception is that high net worth individuals, lots of money, they're quite freely spending, they're quite impulsive. But actually, these people are highly savvy, and a lot of them tell us they've noticed price rises going up. So some brands have increased by 50% or more in recent years. And they've noticed sometimes that the quality, it's like, what am I getting for this extra 50%? Because the brand is ostensibly the same. I'm not getting any extra customer service. I feel the same or even worse because I'm paying 50% more for the same. So really, they are prepared to spend more, but their expectations are higher than ever.
They're not stupid.
Of course.
This topic's been discussed in the luxury space for the pricing, topic.
Yeah.
And I had a guest on here who revenue growth management focusing on the luxury industry. And we talked about it, and I quite liked the conversation because he was quite open, whereas everybody's really taboo about pricing in luxury. But thank you for bringing up the elephant in the room.
They'll pay more, but you've got to give them the reason to do so.
Yes.
And they want to feel like they're still getting good value for money, even if the product now costs twice as much. It's like the challenge is to make them feel twice as good, or at least significantly better.
Excellent note to end on. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Meryam. It's been delightful and very insightful. And thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
It was so much fun.
If you found today's conversation valuable, please share it with a friend or colleague in the luxury world who would benefit too. We'd also like to invite you to join our email community for exclusive tools, behind-the-scenes content, and early access to new resources. Just head to luxeconsumeriq.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.